I want to welcome our students and faculty and the outside guests to tonight's lecture. I have the honor to introduce Petra Blaisse, a designer whose work I've long admired. Petra is a Dutch designer. She studied at the art school in London and in Groningen. Her work is the intersection of landscape and interior. She mastered textiles, sound, light, climate, living and non-living organisms, technology and traditional materials, and she is an expert magician in the art of creating movement and ever-changing effects in architecture. Often, she describes her work as a process of emancipation from architecture, and this always makes me smile, because when for the first time, I leaned onto the curtain she designed for the Cornell Misten Hall, I thought they were tough. They are literally made out of steel. And they are almost epic in scale, like words on themselves, and clearly there was nothing demure in her work, no hesitation. On the contrary, her design holds tight to a very important part of the architectural diagram when she collaborates with architects. I remember when I was a student, looking at this picture of the OMA competition entry for the Jussieu University Library in Paris. This famous picture with the model back illuminated, showing the interior of the library and two men standing on the side of the model. I guess with the interns, I'm not sure. Looking in. A perfect picture not only to represent the continuous interior, but most of all, a statement that culture is nowadays produced by the city as an evolving collective organism, rather than by the personal relationship of a scholar to his or her book. The city is indeed entering and looking into the library with its production of culture. Years later, and with the help of the work of Petra, in the interior of the Sarah Library, this diagram of the inside-in relationship between the city and culture manifests itself in its full potential. I think she kind of made the diagram when I went there, I have to say, because it's not transparent, the building. At times, her work draws from the art of tapestry, an ancient tradition that relies on the techniques of incorporating intricate chromatic gradients and fine material textures with the aim to achieve the perception of an overall picture within architecture. From the Middle Ages to the Baroque period, royalty and the church commissioned a whole series of tapestries from the most sought-after artists of their times. Raffaello, Rubens, Goya, and in the most recent times, Le Corbusier made at least 27 tapestries. Petra's textiles are large in scale, resilient in materiality, unexpected in their finish, grandiose in the creation of the domestic image, and they are the apotheosis of contemporary textiles. Because nowadays, they are boundless and can be understood as digital and highly technological performative medias that are composed pixel by pixel, thread by thread, color by color, either digitally woven or robotically pleated. Her work is a silent protest against the current cliché in our discipline that interior is a field secondary to architecture or even excluded from architecture. Looking at her work on the OMA Sarah Library, one cannot deny that interior is indeed able to follow and lead architectural logics. Her rugs and landscapes of auto-scale nature have the ability to move on the razor blade of personal and public, imagination and reality, inside and outside. More than architecture, interiors impact our perception and stage our way of living. Theatricality, illusionism, cunning deception, ephemerality are the ingredients that attract viewers' attention, allowing the environment to really perform in architectural terms, crafting the response of an audience that architecture so trying to strive to achieve. Paraphrasing Sylvia Levin's article on the work of Petra, if architecture is a theater, interior is theatricality, and a good performance needs no theater. It needs only dramatic flair and a really good curtain. Please join me in welcoming Petra on stage.
Wow, what an introduction. Thank you so much. Actually, that's enough, no? That's it. Well, where am I? I'm here, I think. Yeah, so Inside Outside is a team. I founded it, but there is a group of people around me with different disciplines: architects, landscape architects, interior architects, but also designer, fashion designer, cultural anthropologist, etc. And so together we are creating these things that I'm going to show you. And not only us together, but also together with the teams we work with each different project. We work internationally, and of course this is a terrible cliche, such a map, but what I want to say with it is that we work with climates, both in the interior, especially working with textiles, and in the landscape. The climate, not only cultural and political and economically, but especially physical climate, is very important to our work. And as said, the whole obsession of Inside Outside is this connection or the disconnection between inside and outside in many ways and in many scales. So whether inside a building or looking, organizing views and organizing the view that you will see from inside, connecting or fantasizing, firstly in a kind of exaggerated way, depending on climate and situation, how things can be continuous as an experience, both inside and outside, going up and down, in and out, with or without transparency. And large scale, you might see that as well. As soon as you think of interiors and rooms and these kind of grammar, you see it everywhere. You think, okay, countryside can come in. You see these patches inside that city. Well, those are carpets, those are green rooms, those are... So it's all depending on how you look at it. You can bring wilderness inside the city and vice versa. And yes, the curtains or the interiors and the landscape have also a technical role, and they bring shade, they influence the climate inside, especially, but also sound and light. And if you work together with these two elements, it's really interesting to go into it. Almost scientifically, everything is measured. A curtain or the thinnest fleece in front of a window creates a kind of microclimate between the window and the curtain, and that all needs to be measured and going according to certain standards. So apart from fire retardants, and you have to clean it and wear and tear and so on in public spaces, you have a lot of other things that need to be answered to. And yes, scale, both large scale and small, both inside and out. You can work with textiles or something that looks like textiles. And you can also communicate with it. And here we communicate in Madrid, for instance, the richness of the bird life in Madrid, because Madridians say we are a desert city, but in fact, it's one of the most important resting places of migrating birds, which we discovered because we were asked to do an installation at the Casa Encendida. And so you can communicate outward, but also inward, because the sun moves and then the light comes through as a patch, like a bird flying over through your space. And at Cornell, we communicated a bit another era, almost a 17th century etching of an architect and an artist, mathematician, who was specialized in perspectives. And it's also about using very thin materials or transparent materials to create a kind of fleece between inside and outside. Sometimes curtains move out and become an exterior room. Hardly visible sometimes. Reflection in our work is very important. How it melts things together, how it creates illusions or disformations, but also you don't know when something is inside or outside, obviously. And bringing literally figurative, images towards the interior, communicating here, for instance, in the synagogue in Amsterdam, the wisdom, the richness of knowledge. And on the other side of this shul, there's the opposite, there's the young twigs. And it's actually all created by making little holes in textile, and lots of holes make this drawing and filter the light inward and also communicate the fact that the old generation gives knowledge and experience to the young generation to continue. And so also in our work is breaking open, so organizing or initiating views and connections between different spaces. Sometimes kind of voyeurism and so on. Yeah, you said it already in your speech. The connection is sometimes literal and sometimes not. And in Seattle, it's a very good example of collaboration, of course, where the landscape literally enters. So breaking open can be literal and also using nature in a very synthetic way. Vertically, like for instance in Shenzhen, it covers chimneys that come out of the parking lot. You know, in landscape you have that. You think you can make a garden or a park, but in fact it's hiding or helping technologies underground. And so you have to deal with enormous objects that come out of the ground, or you have to create certain other conditions. So there are tools that we use. And one tool is the track, for instance, and another tool is the path. And the path is very traditional in the landscape because the path choreographs your movement, organizes your movement and your experience in landscape. For instance, in this prison garden, which I designed in 1997, there are 6 gardens, but this path you can follow, and then you have a kind of experience of time and space, but you can also ignore it. With tracks, that's a bit different, but anyway, the track and the path to me are very comparable because the track also organizes the movement of the thing, but also the movement of the people who use it or who are around it. And you can use paths and tracks efficiently in straight lines to connect one point to another or to create a screen between one point of another. But you can also, and you can improvise with paths, creating just mowing and then giving direction and giving a certain efficiency of movement. But you can also use the path as a lyrical tool that, as I said before, you can either use or not use, but in any case, it shows you the way or it binds things together. And a path can be shaded 3-dimensional. And so those are really important thing. And the other thing is the materiality of everything. So our work has nothing to do with computers. And I was reviewing a bit or commenting a bit on work today, and we had the same conversation like, okay, but you have to also understand the material you're working with. So I don't want to quote Kant saying, what does the brick want to be or want to do? What did he say? Anyway, but you have to know what your material wants to be or wants to do or can be. And so you have to know about the roots and the ins and the outs and the growth and the climate and the combination of things. And so we're also interested in that, getting to know the biology of yarns, the biology of planting, and also naturally to work on sustainability together with architects and engineers, as everyone does. How you can recycle water and reuse water, especially in warm climates, of course, but actually everywhere. And plants, trees, roots, soil, that all works together to help us clean air, soil, and water. So this, I said before, use green in different ways and very synthetic ways sometimes. And also use green in a kind of almost 17th century way, that you create gardens that are composed of shapes and that create rooms that you can use, but actually based on very old-fashioned kind of symbolic decorative things, or use the planting as in Shenzhen that you saw before as a carpet almost, here encircling a house north of New York, So this is a private garden, but so you could really use it very graphically or very lyrically as you wish. And then materials like stone or rock to work with craftsmen and people to soften in it, to use it as a topographic tool like in Casa da Musica. So the knowledge of materials, the choice of materials, and the understanding of the crafts, of the craftsman actually, how things are made, how things are printed, cut, planted, multiplied, structured, constructed, etc., to get to know the people who do it, and that collaboration is incredibly fascinating and also essential in our work. And sometimes you have a language or a tool, or we use a lot of circles, and circles are naturally round, but they also create flexibility, not only in the movement, but also, for instance, if you use this foil onto a cloth, which is the first curtain I made in 1986, this foil is glued onto this velvet, but because it's round, the velvet can still move fluidly. And all these things are sometimes decorative, but also necessary to understand the fluidity and the necessity of round shapes. Deforming things, cutting things, stitching, knitting, knotting, gluing, growing, looking. So our work is actually about a lot of verbs, and constructing with different materials, creating spaces, both large and small, understanding that certain materials can be used for certain specific things, and making it yourself, and understanding the technique behind it. And then another obsession is the emancipation of the curtain, for instance, and almost fighting gravity by looking at air movements and weight and possibilities of chance and reactions to, or deconnecting of architecture. Okay, now about projects. The last few years we've been making gardens and parks that are actually being made. And that is an enormous sensation because that doesn't always happen as a designer. This is in Doha, in Qatar, where we were asked by OMA to design gardens and curtains for two projects. One is the Qatar Foundation headquarters and one is the National Library. So this is the natural condition there. And visiting the desert, you not only see areas where there are lots of plants actually, but you also see plants that feed from roots from other plants. And those are incredible, like a surprise in a kind of what seems to be a nothingness. Usually in Doha and in the Gulf and in the hot areas, they make gardens and parks like this. And of course, we didn't want to do that. Also because the Qatar Foundation headquarters is headed by Sheikh Hammoza, who wants to communicate the local and the national culture and richness of their culture. And so we wanted to make a garden, of course also sustainable, but to symbolize also as in the form of the garden, the richness of the local planting, so desert planting. So we researched, we visited botanic collections, we met professors and students, but also professors who gave us books and who drove us into the desert. And we found out that there are 15 different plant communities in the Qatarian desert, which is a fascinating idea because you don't see that. It's communities means that plants in certain conditions, it can be the salt in the desert, you know, because, well, I can't explain everything in detail, or it can be the moisture, or it can be the wind, or it can be the shade, or it can be the animals, but there is a reason that these communities are different everywhere and that they also are together to help each other. because plants and trees help each other. It's not an individual that you can, place anywhere, but they make each other stronger. And so these communities were the beginning starting point for this project. This project is a totally synthetic situation. It's a plate, a concrete plate, floating above a shaded parking lot. And out of that parking lot, two buildings arise. One is the headquarters and one is a research center. And so we had to make a garden on that plate, a complete synthetic garden consisting of planters. So we thought of a system, completely logical system, a grid of planters, from large to small and from high to low, but also with a gradient of water, because you are not supposed to spend a lot of water there, as you can imagine. So there is a limit per day that you can irrigate. And instead of spreading that out evenly, we chose to do it unevenly. And so that is quite a challenge. So here you see forms of presentation to the client. For instance, we make all these collages, to the architects also. The finishing of this plate is travertin, and this travertin also shapes the planters. And so here you see these collections of different plant communities. And in the end, you get this kind of drawing, which has in each planter described which plant goes where, and also actually mapped out in an understandable way, because you have to communicate long distance. You're not living there as a designer, you are in the Netherlands, and there is a group of contractors, subcontractors, sub-subcontractors, etc., and they need to be able to understand your intent and the how to and where to plant things. Going to nurseries and mapping out all the plants that were necessary. We also discovered that you couldn't find and you couldn't collect plants locally. It's forbidden. It's totally protected. You can't go into the desert and take a little leaf or a seed or a twig or anything. You're not supposed to do that. So you have to interest, how do you say that, contractors, I guess, firms that handle plants, and they have to sign that they are willing to do the job of growing all these plants for you, for the project. And that's quite a job because, it's a lot of them. And the Qatar Foundation also started their own nursery. So through the years, slowly, these plants were actually grown. So before the building site starts to be active, you already need to know who's doing it, when they start, like almost 3 years before the building starts. The whole action of collecting plants needs to start. And not everything was grown. Many plants came from California, from Spain, so local desert plants came from other countries, often, but were also grown there. And so then the building starts, and you see these planters, this grid of planters coming, and the planters themselves are multi-purpose little machines, because they have, of course, drainage and irrigation and lighting, but they also have the whole air conditioning system for the parking lot integrated. And some of these so-called planters are actually openings so that fresh air can move freely through the parking, and they are also staircases. So we made gardens in the parking lot with trees growing out of these openings, so that you would also experience trees from different levels. And here you see it grow. There you see a stair going down. So it's very clean in that sense. There is no separate garbage can. It's also integrated in the planter. And you also see that things have to grow, right? Because you need a lot of shade there, and the trees are very young. And this is one of the things of this profession, that you have on the one side, the textiles that are actually degrading the moment you finish them or you install them, and you have the landscape that starts when you install them. And you need 50 years before it becomes the vision that you put on paper. It takes generations. What is also important for me to discover, for us to discover, is that once you install a garden, the story is a starting point also in the sense of maintenance and involvement and demanding, actually, a lot of attention and a lot of investment, both physical investment and mental investment, to keep it growing and to keep it going. And the other project is not far from the headquarters, the National Library, and it's all in Education City. It's a new development of the last 7 years, I think, 10 years, this whole new area of Education City. So the National Library is not far. This is a collage, of course, and there we have a real garden with full soil, but more importantly, we were asked to develop a curtain that in that huge space, interior space, completely white and, as you see, slightly reflective, an open auditorium is only shaped or actually defined by a curtain. And what you see here is a beam. It's actually a rectangular beam that floats and that has the same slope as the chairs of the auditorium. And I'm afraid I was involved in imagining this, this beam in this shape and in this situation years before, and I thought I was really stupid to think of this, because what I didn't realize, or not enough, is that if you hang a piece of cloth on a diagonal, it looks terrible. It really doesn't work. So when I got the commission to really do it, we had a lot to think about, because the curtain, of course, has to open and has to be stored, and then it goes from straight to diagonal to straight, and then again diagonal and straight, and so this cloth will really look weird. So we went to the Textile Museum in Tilburg in Holland. They are specialized in weaving and knitting, etc. And we said we need to find a yarn that is slippery, because if it's not slippery, it will look terrible. And if it's slippery, it could move itself into position. And so we found a yarn that is actually tree bark, and that vertically slides, and that, you know, and the warp fixes it or stabilizes it. But it has to be incredibly precisely calculated, the amount of slipperiness and openness and the amount of holding it together. And so what you see here is that there is a rib, we call it ribs, that white line there with this ball, with this circle, is actually, as you see, woven more densely, so it holds the thing together. And then the story of what does it communicate? And we had a lot of ideas. You know, it should always be abstract. It can never have real things like humans or animals. But we had vegetal things, and we had texts, and we had, but none of that was appreciated by the Qatar Petroleum and Qatar Foundation. And so we came up with the stars, the stellar system. If you are in the desert and you look at the sky, it's an amazing sight. Then we decided it's an auditorium, so it should be very dark inside, but it should be very light outside, because it's a totally white environment, a totally white space. So there is a weaving technique. It's not damast, it's called jacquard, but you have a jacquard with 3 layers that you don't have positive and negative, but you have, so white is black and black is white and blah, blah. But you have another way, you can have one that you have hidden yarns. And if you have hidden yarns, you can create two completely different sides and two completely different colors. So inside from black to dark blue and outside totally white and silver, we discovered, as you see, if you have the stars, this is a Dutch way of organizing the stars, linear, of course, logical. And yeah, and then if you hang it on site, you think, yeah, it's okay, but it's a bit small scale. It looks a bit like a shirt, you know, a men's shirt. It's not very architecturally connected to the place. So we were looking for something to give it a scale, and we went to the Islamic Museum. Of course, it's a really beautiful, beautiful collection. And one of the things is this measuring tool, Astrolabia it's called. And so we drew them. I took these pictures, and then we drew them, and we integrated them in the curtain design. So the scale of the building is also represented. Then you have to translate it into computer system yourself, because you have to understand where each yarn is going. This is also quite architectural in the sense that it's spatial, right? You have to understand where it is and where it goes. And then it's translated in a special computer system for the weaving machine, and there it is. Then it has to be made fire retardant, and we discovered that this tree bark was like a sponge. The whole fire retardant liquid became part of the whole weave, and it was all wobbly and awful, and we thought, oh shit, this is not going to work. So what to do? And then the Textile Museum said, well, no problem, we just build frames, and we dry them in frames. But you must understand, it is 100 frames. It's incredible work. So that was fantastic. Then you roll it up and transport it, because you only have pieces of cloth, but you don't have a curtain. And we had to connect each band of cloth horizontally because of this shifting yarn and because of the warp and etc. So we had to also find a way to connect it, because if you connect it with a stitch, you lose this whole flexibility. So we found a way and made the recipes, and it was made. And these are all tests on site, because the curtain also needs doors, emergency exits, being produced, a last check, and then transported to the library, by then ready, and we installed it. And the track system has, of course, its roll. And if you want a pleat, if you want a regular pleat, you have to also make these chains in between. Enfin, it's a whole thing. And seaming on site, cutting and seaming on site, really, really, really nerve-wracking, because of its slipperiness. You know, if you cut it, it falls almost apart. But everything done, and then done. And it's there. And Sheikh Hamoza likes it. So we're proud. This was last December, February. And then if you look out, there's the garden, a principle of indentations to catch each moisture. You know, it's very moist in Doha. In the morning, you have dew everywhere, and it drips and it feeds the plants. So this helps a bit. Everything for these projects was tested one-to-one, also the architecture. So here's one indentation test, and then it's being built. Fountains, lots of workers working like mad, and then growing. Opening the 16th of April. There's a second entrance to the Heritage Garden, sunken garden under the roof. And we used leftovers from the travertin, used for the interior of the Heritage Garden, to create a landscape. A theater, like a stage. and leaving Qatar. So those projects take years, yeah? It's like Seattle, Casa da Musica, Doha, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, easily. But sometimes we have a commission for something quick, and that is very good, very energizing. So 2000, I don't remember what the date was. But anyway, we were asked by Francesco Bonami, a curator, Italian curator, to be one of 9 artists to create a pavilion, temporary pavilion, in this garden of Villa Manin during the Arts Biennale in Venice in the summer. And there was an exhibition in that beautiful house, Caspar Koenig's collection. So the public would see the collection and then move out to this beautiful garden and walk around in the garden and see one pavilion after the next. But I said to Francesco, sorry, I'm not a sculptor and I'm not an architect and we don't make pavilions, but we'll think about something. And then we thought, yes, let's make something typical inside-outside, namely a flexible pavilion, a moving pavilion, a personal pavilion. And so we bought 60 umbrellas and took off its original skin and transplanted it or replaced it with an aluminum-like material that is translucent and reflective at the same time. And we created these reflective stainless steel circles to place them in the landscape. Produced, in the end, 57 of these rifletuti, we called them, personal pavilions. And so the guests were just given this personal pavilion and they would walk around with it. And it had, of course, holes because we always make organized views. And the holes, of course, create these shapes and shadows on your body. And so they follow also these drops, we called it drops. And they created also an extra dimension. All the trees seem to grow down into the Earth's crust. And that's nice, you know, that's quick to do something like that. And we talked this afternoon in an interview about curtains and what they are, actually. They are personalities. They could be personalities, but they can also be a background. And in this case, we were asked by Centre Pompidou in Paris to make a curtain as a kind of coordinator of an exhibition on Pierre Paulin's furniture. So it was already designed with these square podiums, and his furniture is, you know, he worked from the 50s to the 2000s, so he made a lot of furniture in different phases and fashions. And so this curtain then is a backdrop to that. It leads the people through the space, but it also symbolizes a bit the different eras of his work, but actually only with 1 or 2 different materials. So it's very simple projection screen, plastified weave that is translucent, and we treated it differently, slightly differently on the way. And then ending in a very massive curtain where there were projections telling about his career. We also influenced a bit the design by cutting into the podiums, and so the curtain would be like a knife going through. But here you see a bit like only by stitching these material, it looks all of a sudden, to me at least, more 50s than another piece of curtain. And so you go into this timeline. And always cutting and opening and creating different effects. Using plastic, fake leather, openings. His work is very, you know Pierre Paulin, right? Or not? Nobody knows Pierre Paulin? Guys. It's a French designer, and he made beautiful furniture. Okay, then a garden for a museum, Walker Art Center. we were asked by Olga Wieso and Andrew Blauveld, a curator and the director, to join Ai Weiwei and David Adje in a kind of collaborative think tank to think about the trajectory through these two buildings, the Herzog and Dumeron and the other building. And especially Herzog and Dumeron has a very difficult trajectory. People couldn't really find their way. And it was very nice to speak, the three of us and the four of us and the five of us, but it didn't bring us very, very far, except that we thought it would be nice to continue the trajectory from the museum outward. The other question was the garden, supposed to be the garden, was actually also the roof of the parking lot that Herzog and Dumeron made underneath. And it was actually not designed, it was just there, except that James Turrell has a beautiful installation in it. For the rest, it was used, very intensely used, is still intensely used, but it wasn't very nice and not very attractive. So we made a design that was very topographical. We made the main movement is to make a hill that is really like a romantic English mound, you know, also hiding the ugly buildings behind, but also creating perspective and depth and a very soft movement and a view from inside. Then the galleries from inside projected out in the form of bosques. So these are all rectangles built up from trees or carpets of grasses. And these became vegetal rooms, as it were, galleries. And then the path that continues outward and brings people up and down over the hill. And it was a whole construction because the whole parking structure was not up to carrying a hill. So, so it's actually completely synthetic with foam and lightweight, not earth, but a kind of mix of earth with granulates. And these were collages, you know, how you would see the mound or the hill in autumn. And we also designed curtains, but they didn't happen. But this is reality. This was imagination, reality. And so that was done, and in collaboration with architects, HGA architects, who also designed a new entrance at the backside of the Walker Art. And giving the parking presence, because nobody could ever find the entrance, with trees around it and a lettering on top. And so trees can have a lot of different functions. The path. Seasons. Turrell in a carpet. And the front along Hennepin Avenue, where a lot of traffic drives by, and the entrance in the Herzog and Dumeron part is there, but nobody can stop there. You can't even drop people off, so how do you find it? So we softened it a bit and opened up the entrance. Views from a filter a bit between the building and the traffic. Are you still okay? Yes. Not bored, because I could jump to something else. This is also a short-term, let's say, art intervention asked by, sorry, I need to drink. Asked by the director of the Architecture Institute in Rotterdam. The Architecture Institute owns a villa from the 1930s by Brinkman and van der Vlucht, Dutch architects that also built the Van Nelle Fabriek. It's the Nieuwe Bouwen. It's a movement called the Nieuwe Bouwen, the new building, and its theme is air, light, and space. Licht, lucht en ruimte. Yeah. Light, air, and space. And it's all very influenced by America, by the way, because the owner is the director of the Van Nelle Fabriek, went to America and also was influenced by American architecture, and also about health. So it's about health, opening windows, having fresh air, also hygiene, you know, surfaces that you can easily clean, etc. It's a beautiful house, and it's a museum house. So it means that it's furnished according to how it was furnished in the past by this family, Sonneveld family. And so, as all these museum houses are, you visit it as if these people are out for a walk, but they are not. They are a long time dead, and all these furnitures are pieces of the collection. And it is the original furniture, but they added, for instance, these voiles along the windows because of UV light, etc., to protect, rightly so, the collection. And so the director said, yeah, I'm going to liven up this museum house by introducing an artist once a year who does an intervention for 6 months. So 6 months, somebody does something to the house, and 6 months, it's like this again. And you can enter, you have to put socks over your shoes, and then you can walk around. And I thought, well, maybe not do anything, but only exaggerate the essence of the architecture of that time, namely light, air, and space, and take away these voiles or these curtains and really let everything come in, and the sun and the shadows and the seasons, and cover the floor with mirror. So this was the presentation to the Architecture Institute, which was accepted, where the mirror would be. Of course, not stainless steel, but a foil on a PVC plate, and we had to build an underfloor, and it's meticulously done. So it's everywhere, under each tube and under each heating, because I wanted to show the underside of the architecture and the underside of the interior detailing, the cupboards, the paint that stops underneath a certain surface, the doors, etc. But what also came to light is the secret elements of this so-called family interior, because under each object there is an alarm system. So you saw all of a sudden all the threads in the alarm system, and you saw all the stickers of museums that borrowed the furniture, and you saw everything. And people walking on it were also incredibly exposed. And what was interesting is that everything that falls, like textiles, were all of a sudden standing. So everything was upside down. Also the terraces, the balconies. And look what happens. And through time, these mirrored plates became deformed because people walked on it. So of course, what used to be straight became a bit different. And so you get these strange Gaudi-esque effects all of a sudden in what's supposed to be very modern architecture, as you can see here. So very simple, just one thing, and lots of stories to tell. We won a competition for the outside space of a faculty in Amsterdam, lots of different buildings, lots of different faculties, and completely closed off before we did this intervention. It's the end of the canal system. You know, Amsterdam has canals. And the furnishing of these streets is with brick and with natural stone and with elm trees and with these very old lamps. And so we thought we should just continue that language completely, so the same material, but to add something or to make new use of that very classic material by making it a white ribbon. So white bricks that are used to make a zebra or whatever, something warning you that you have to slow down, all of a sudden becomes a romantic tool of a ribbon that connects all the buildings and actually opens up the whole the whole area, and also shows the students where to go, because of course you don't need to follow it, as we said before, but it also creates moments and areas that can become gardens or seatings or whatever you like, and there are hidden interior gardens. This was the presentation collage, and here it's being made, growing, for students to sit and to think and to communicate and to enjoy different seasons of a family of trees swirling through the space. And be careful, if you're not there when it is made, things look horrible. So you have to be critical. And so we were incredibly happy to work in Holland. You can imagine we could just bike to the site, which is an enormous difference. And we developed these benches that would float over the ribbon. And here you see some air views. And then it opened, and the students took over, and I couldn't sleep. Look at it. Will it ever survive? But it's made for them, and it's made for everyone, so we'll see. I'm sure it'll be fine. So we were asked by two curators from Switzerland, from the ETH, Niels and Fredi, where we worked with before to help them with exhibition spaces, etc., to make screens for an exhibition. Theft is vision. So they had they were going to make an exhibition solely on copying, or being very visibly inspired by the work of someone else. And they wanted this, Luma owns the space in this building, and it's one big space, and they asked us to make screens so that they could make division in the content of their exhibition. So we made a model and imagined what these screens could be. Was it real walls with doors, or was it a curtain? No, please, no curtain. Let's make something very minimal. And we asked to send us all the images of the artworks, naturally trying to understand what was going to hang there, and then systematized all these works and how they were put and the space between them, and then started to think these screens should be transparent. Transparent because then you get a connection between the works, not one place and then a next place and a next place, but also a perspective and a connection between them. And we thought of scaffolding, but it wasn't elegant enough, so we used a very thin profile, and I thought it would be very decadent to use just a plastic that you use in a kitchen. What's it called? Saran. Saran? Yeah, exactly. Is it shrink wrap, or is it? Shrink wrap. Yeah, so it sticks to itself, right? So, and they were enthusiastic about the idea, but it means that the structure is visible, right? So you have to also think, is each of these screens the same division of structure? So we actually asked the curators, how many works have to hang on these structures, and how heavy are they, and how are they placed? So that influenced the logic of the division of the, here you see, they are all different because of the works that would hang on it. And then the museum technicians did all the tests and starting to make it. They needed 4 guys because the tension, and you roll on and on. So it was quite some work. And the beauty of it is that it moves, because when you walk through and you make the air move, it flutters, so it's like water. So here it is. You can think anything you like. Anything. Sometimes it's good to revisit I was very involved in this project in Bordeaux with the interior and the landscape. It was a wilderness that had to be opened for view and the placement of the house. But here also the track and the curtains were very important from the beginning, because the concept of this villa with Rem Koolhaas and Cecil Bellman together is incredibly characteristic, and it's all about weight and non-weight and gravity and contradictions and invisible structures that hold everything up. And so very fascinating. And so curtains became important because it had to give the space room-like character, but also at night, because it's outside the city, it's totally dark outside, so we needed to create a fleece on the glass for the evening. But also they have an art collection, and they had to be hung. So the idea here is that a track is actually encircling the transparent living space, both outside and inside. Where is this thing? Yeah. So this is a structure, a mirror, a kind of tube holding up this enormous concrete block that hovers above. Of course, there's also a structure like this, pulling. But anyway, this is standing there, but this is actually a terrace, and this is inside. And here's a curtain outside that encircles this terrace, also against the mosquitoes. And here's a double track going out. Here's the glass facade, fireplace, going out and then encircling also the terrace. So this whole curtain can go out, but also the paintings. So one track is for curtains and one track is for paintings, actually very old-fashioned, traditional, that you would have a painting in front of textile, but you could also have a painting in the garden. So in many years ago, we made all these curtains also in the bathroom and on the terrace to enclose the terrace. And then 15 years later, the owner called and said, you know, you have to renew these curtains, are, of course, decomposing a bit, or they're a bit torn, or I need more because I want a better acoustic now, I'm a bit older, I want a bit more comfort, etc. And it's really interesting to go back to a project 15 years later, because it has changed, the client has changed, you have changed, everything has changed. And so to revisit it and look again and to understand the changed position of a person living there is very useful and enriching. So we made a carpet, and you know that this is a room that goes up and down for the owner who was handicapped. He unfortunately died a couple of years ago, but it was the room with the pneumatic system goes from the cellar to the living room to the bedroom, and it follows a bookcase or a, what is it cost? Huh? Yeah, a shelving system that goes from the kitchen and the wine cellar to his studio with bookcases to his clothes. So he was completely independent in that sense. And now he's not there anymore. It's used as a dining place, so it's very practical. The table goes to the kitchen, everything is put on. Sometimes the guests are put on, and we all go up, and then we are in this open space, and everything can happen. And so this carpet naturally is also cut in two. And what Madame Lemoine wanted was that something would also organize this large open space, because you couldn't really furnish it. It was always everywhere, and nobody had a real place. And so this carpet creates a kind of center. And new curtains, really more there, more present, that would move outside, always with a cut in it or a window, billowing in the wind, where the mosquito net meets the curtain. And upstairs in the concrete block where all these holes are as windows, new curtains for the bedrooms. This is a very thin curtain with massive rectangles and squares, actually, as you can see, covering the windows, floating elements. And here for the sun who couldn't stand the daylight, a very thick curtain, but still with a little slit. You have to know what time it is, no? You can't just sleep the whole day. And then, as last, go back to the installation in Venice called Reset. In 2012, we were asked by the then director of the Architecture Institute, Ole Bouwman, to represent the Netherlands in the architectural biennial in Venice. And I was incredibly surprised and also incredibly proud, because I don't consider us as architects, and so it was very, very wonderful he asked us. But the terrible thing was he asked first if we could represent beauty. And that is a serious thing, don't you think? So I said, no, absolutely not. We can't represent anything as arrogant or as, subjective as that. So could you please give us a practical program, because that's how we work. It's not about aesthetics, it's about something it needs to do. And so he said, okay, well then, please, last time we represented the scandalous situation of vacant buildings in the Netherlands, which is also in the whole West, I think. So the market economy just forces the builders and the contractors and the developers to build and build, but in fact there are many, many buildings empty. And so could you please symbolize a way to reuse empty buildings in a way that is flexible and easy and cheap? So we thought, yes, we could do that. That's a program we can understand. You have the Rietveld of the 50s Pavilion of the Netherlands, built up of 4, 4, 4, 8, 8, 16, 16. It's all very measured and all very logical. And we thought, well, maybe we create a monster that kind of moves through that space and creates different effects. And Chipperfield had a theme called Common Ground. And we thought, well, let's use then very simple materials that you can find everywhere in the world. A bicycle chain, a piece of cloth, and a few motors. And create a shape, a loop actually, with a piece of cloth that would move through the space. And by moving through the space, create different shapes of rooms. And that would then symbolize different ways of use. So it could be a hairdresser, a church, a dancing, a school. You could imagine anything. The other thing we did was open up all the windows so that the sun could come in and create shadows, the time. So we created 12 positions for the curtain, 12 hours of the day, 12 hours of the night. Daylight coming in with shadows shifting through space and adding mirrors on the roof so that time would have two different lines because of reflection, east-west, west-east, and reality, east-west. Time fleeting in two directions. Taking away all the lamellae of the ceiling, and creating with a German company who's incredibly good. Look at their drawings. It should be simple, but I think they're pieces of art. And look at this. It's amazing. Well, I thought so anyway. I thought, let's not do any curtain. Look at that. It's enough. The illusion, what could be, but is not, is often better. Anyway, we made the recipes, and the recipes of the curtain are based on architectural language. So it is vertical division, horizontal division, view, obstruction of view, color, non-color, reflection, absorption, etc., transparency and opaque. And so it's a kind of, theoretic textile objects that represents architectural language. And when we installed it and we made it move, it didn't make any sound. And I was incredibly disappointed because I thought it would really make this mechanic sound, you know, like tick, 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 tick. And instead of that, it did zzz. I said to these technicians, what did you do? It's perfect. They said, yes, it's perfect, so. I said, well, we need some sound. Okay. Some mechanic sound, you know, not beautiful sound, but some. And then, well, that didn't happen. And then we were having lunch with all the technical guys building up the thing and having pizza, Dutch guys. And I said, so what are you doing actually apart from this job? Well, I'm an artist. Well, I'm a writer. Oh, I'm a sculptor. And the fourth one said, I'm a musician. I'm a composer. I said, ah, interesting. So have you heard of Tinguely, of mechanic sound, things moving? Yes. I said, well, can you do something so that if the curtain passes a certain point, that there is something happening? Sure. And he made this from found pieces of metal and stuff he put between the tracks, and he put these steel fingers on the top of the curtain. So each time it passes, it goes tick, 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 ping, 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 ping. So I was happy. Thank you. I'm going to challenge you. Stop speaking. One of the statements of this installation is also to have no explanation, none, and also that it takes time. So I hope you have time. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.